to get a little feedback there. And Mark, are you ready to roll? It is 7 o'clock. Are you ready to
I'm ready to go.
leap
I'm
forward
getting some
here?
text messages that the password may not be working for some folks. I'm not quite sure why.
It's
Um,
capital V O volunteer,
oh,
right?
here we
All
go.
caps.
All caps worked. Yep. Okay,
Okay,
good.
that's it. Yep.
All right, so we'll go ahead and get started. Thanks. So welcome everyone. Happy to see you all here, and thanks for continuing to support this. We're in month three. We're getting great FAA support. Thank you very much, Jim. We appreciate the opportunity to do these. So I'm going to start diving in. The way the format works is please use the Q&A. Rob, Jim, and perhaps either Brian or Alex, if they join, will be able to answer some questions directly. And other questions that they can't answer directly, they'll go ahead and either interrupt me or during a pause, ask me the question, and I'll go back and try to answer it. And I'll leave some time at the end for questions as well. So I think you've already met all of us. Brian Schiff and Alexi may join us. They're both in the airlines and have, impressive safety backgrounds as well. So I often get asked what kind of airplanes and what kind of license you can have, and I want to make sure we start out by saying anybody with anything can volunteer. Different organizations have different requirements. Most of the medical organizations require a certified plane, but Young Eagles, for example, doesn't care what airplane you're using. There's some smaller nonprofits that are discovery flight oriented that don't mind if you have experimental or light sport aircraft. Um, and it varies. So whatever organization you look at, they'll be very clear about what they can and cannot accept. But again, if you're interested in volunteering, there's always a way to do something. And if you know people that are just wanting to participate and are ground-based or non-pilots, there's typically something for them to do as well. So Wings proficiency program, we always are going to list this. You'll definitely be a safer pilot if you download at least the basic scenario. I have basic and I'm working on advanced. Here's the quick ways to learn more about that. So success today is making sure you're aware of how large the need is, and it's huge, and that it's a rewarding responsibility when you do start volunteering. There's a lot of considerations. If you've been seeing the first few mission webinars, you know them already, but I'll go over them again. And whenever you have a mission, you're not going to be the first that's flown that kind of mission typically. It'd be very, very rare. So if you ever do have a question, you can ask a mentor or come back and, I'm happy to answer questions anywhere in the country, as is Rob, I'm sure. So here's some fun numbers, and every month I'll add more interesting numbers to our review. In the first session, we reviewed 6 million cancer appointments are missed every year because of transportation. There's 32 million people in the US that live rurally with limited access to medical care. Um, Only 500 high schools out of the 27,000 have a STEM program. I updated the following number. More than 4 million animals are lost every year because they have nowhere to go and are euthanized. There's only 33 comprehensive cancer centers in the entire country, and they're in the major urban areas. And the new numbers for this week are there's over 100 million non-emergency medical transportation rides focused only on within a state or intrastate. Those programs do not cover interstate, and a lot of the patients getting that kind of transportation have no idea that there are long distance volunteer flying services available to them. So we need to spread that knowledge around.
Hey, Mark.
Yes.
There was a request to back up to the previous slide so that they could capture the QR codes. Would you mind doing that just to,
That
there you
that
go.
one?
Yes, thank you. If you just
Okay.
hold that for, continue to share, but just hold that
And if you
thought.
just take a quick picture of it, then you can go back and rescan it again.
Right.
So, and it will be in the recording of the webinar.
Yes.
So,
And also the wings. Did you cover the wings? I'm sorry, I was focused on the questions. Did you talk about the wings at all?
yes, I did
Okay,
pretty
go
quickly.
ahead. Sorry, thanks.
So the next number is 1 billion rides over actually the numbers it says is 1.5 billion rides a year are given by family caregivers to gain access to medical care. And there's this series of caregiver organizations, volunteer organizations around the US. The majority of those have, again, no idea that there are volunteer services available to help them get their family members to medical care over 100 miles. So the need is very, very large. And we have a job not only to fly these missions or help with these missions, even if they're on the ground, but to build awareness about the opportunity to access them. And I'm going to go off on a quick reminder that occurred at a lunch meeting recently with a pilot who mentioned that his mother had just passed and had a hard time with the nursing home getting her to care. Um, and I mentioned, hey, non-emergency medical transport, she's on Medicaid. Did they offer that to you? And he said, no. He said, well, let's look up Ohio. And the nursing home that was involved and this family had no idea that there was for free transportation services available to get his mother from the nursing home to the desired care. So big need for both building awareness and actually performing the service. We've gone over this briefly before, and I'll just go through this slide really quickly. And it just goes over the breadth of services that we can all provide, from doing animals to cargo to STEM flights to blood. It can be any number of things. Here's an example of the list. So last year there was a lot of disaster relief that was local and very important, made the news. Medical care is huge. Discovery flights is actually the biggest number, with Young Eagle setting records every year. I think last year was over 40,000. And it again, if you can think of a need, it's probably out there. And here's every month now we'll focus on two of the volunteer pilot organizations just to make you aware of what they're actually doing. And here's
You can change kids in your community, right where you live, anywhere in the United States. We help you find the kids, you fly them, and you inspire the next generation to pursue aviation and aerospace careers.
This organization, STEM Flights, based in Virginia, covers the country. I fly for them as well. It's mostly high school age kids that are interested in some aspect of aviation. And now they're partnering with EAA Aero Educate to also make sure they have access to more content to help them explore aviation. So great organization.
You can change.
Another organization, I think, Jim, you just mentioned this, Pilots and Paws.
It's a national organization of volunteer pilots. They work together and connect shelters and rescues and fly animals in need. Whatever the case may be, our volunteer pilots will step up to the plate and fly these animals to a place of safety.
And as the map shows, it can be short, it can be cross country, it can be dogs, cats, birds, rescue wolves. It can be any number of animals, turtles. So great organization. Patty Wagstaff is an ambassador. She's in her pictures here, and she's active with Pilots and Paws. Great organization. One thing they asked me to do is make sure that everyone's aware that if you do sign up to do a mission, and you don't have crates for transporting the animals, they'll provide you with the crates for free, and that's the email. So safety considerations, this doesn't change month to month. And as we mentioned, we could spend many, many months going over all these considerations. And this month we'll be mentioning the ones that are checked marked again. I won't read them out loud. We'll just move on. So proficiency, this is an interesting one if you notice. So, and if you notice this and this, unbeknownst to me, two television crews had launched their respective helicopters on a mission that I was flying with a baby that had a heart condition, which if you have seen some of my videos, it's in one of those. And they filmed my landing and all my taxi all the way to the FBO. And luckily, that day I was right on center line on everything. It was disciplined. So you never really know who may be listening or not listening, but also watching. So it's always good to be attentive and be as at your best. In this case, there was three local TV stations that used the footage, and then it eventually got picked up by Inside Edition nationally. So again, I was really, really happy that I had been pretty disciplined that day. So we didn't do a poll this time, but every time we just briefly review how the whole process works. Um, Obviously, one of the biggest things that I was mentioning before is people aren't aware of the availability of these services. So we not only need to help fly people that have the need, but we also need to help build awareness. We also want to make sure we're finding the right pilot organization, volunteer pilot organization. We can do that at Air Care Alliance, and they'll forward it onto the right organization, or you can do the research on your own. And the other piece that we go over every month is reminding everyone that AOPA has some good courses on this. And really knowing your personal minimums and having well thought out checklist is important. AOPA can provide you with one, but I encourage everyone to develop their own checklists. I like to do as much as I can do before people even get to the airport and eliminate as many variables as possible. So once they do get to the airport, we're just focused on the mission and getting going. And this, I think we went over in every month, but again, putting together your own pre-airport briefing. This particular fellow put out a YouTube video on how to get in and out of his plane, put on a seatbelt, use the hammer. And some of the volunteer pilot organizations have set up their own pre-airport arrival videos or content. So first, it's allergy season. I'm not sure how many people are already suffering from allergies, but it's allergy season, and I thought that it made sense to start with a good example of both hydration and medication. On this particular day, and this is one of my scenarios. Um, I got up very early and didn't feel as good as I would normally want to feel in the mornings when doing these. And I'm a morning person, so I was just feeling a little off. Wasn't quite sure why. Um, and the airplane I had not checked, and we had no water bottles. It was very usual early, get up early, do the dogs, get on the way, take regular myriad of medications and vitamins, and drink my 2 cups of coffee and get going. But that evening, I had woken up and taken 2 Peptos. And I landed checked in with my wife like I always do. And she said, "Oh, do you know that you took Benadryl that was in the Pepto bottle?" Uh, and I had to make a decision. Okay, that's probably why I wasn't feeling well. And I probably wasn't well hydrated. So, what to do? So one of the things that I know I could have done better is understand, how much the waiting time should have been before moving on after taking Benadryl. And the FAA recommends 5 times the dosage period. So if there was, in this case, for Benadryl, you would take it every 6 hours. So they would say don't fly for 30 hours after taking a regular dose of Benadryl, which is a long time to wait. And then, so that I didn't know at that particular time. And then the other thing that came up and also came up during a recent aerobatic safety review was pilots in general do not hydrate well. And that means not drinking enough water, but also not getting electrolytes, especially when it's starting to get warm out and you're sweating a lot. And I didn't know this until I did this review that your thirst trigger occurs late. You've already gotten behind the curve in terms of hydration. So you can recognize impairments like your speech isn't working well. You may have a headache. Number of issues, and you can look these up on the FAA website. And also, most of us are thinking that we are getting some water benefit out of coffee, but we know, most of us should know that that's not true. It's not going to make up our 1.4 to 2 quarts that we're already behind. Um, and then the other thing, and if you're getting to be an older pilot, you may be on something for hypertension, and all meds are not created equal. In this case, lisinopril, unbeknownst to me, was known to provide or cause a dry cough and speech issues. And so after this day, I asked my primary care provider to review what I was taking for side effects. And she came up with, oh, yeah, this could be giving you a dry cough. Something that I wish I'd asked 2 years earlier, and made a simple medication change, dry cough and speech issues, and taking water made my voice and enunciation improve, and it's been good since. So knowing your medications and being very careful, and not treating it lightly is just very, very important. Um, so in this case, I knew enough to delay the return leg until I really felt I was feeling better, but I didn't wait the 30 hours. I didn't know that equation until after I got back. And I did make sure to research and follow up on the hydration aeromedical issues and was proactive in getting my medication changed. So again, can't stress the importance of us being sensitive to issues that can make us feel off in ways that we're not used to self-assessing. Um, the 2 QR codes here will get you into the more detailed aspects of the information that I'm referencing here, and especially as allergy season is coming right now. And the reason I had Benadryl in the Pepto bottle is I'd been in Africa, and in Africa, Benadryl is illegal in some countries. And the unofficial recommendation is you put your Benadryl in your Pepto bottles because they look similar. So bad thing is don't forget to separate your medications when you come back from a trip to Africa. So if there's no questions here, I'll continue. So here's a template example. Wasn't my particular example, but it was given to me. So STEM flights are one-on-one activities, and typically you're paired with a student and one parent. In this case, and typically you don't have help when you're working with that particular student. In this case, a family of 6 arrived instead of 2 that you're expecting. And the pilot set a limit of 1 and plus 3, which was at the time their best judgment. Now there's rules around that based on this particular scenario happening a couple of years ago. And during the ramp walk, pilot, as we usually do, get into talking to the student about what the flight is and what we're going to be doing once we get to the plane. One family member had wandered off and went walking towards a bunch of other airplane types that were being run by a flight school, and a couple of them had their engines running. So pilot rather rapidly tried to assess the situation and figure out what to do. Luckily, there was a fuel truck driver nearby who he waved down and got to stay with the family, and he went off and retrieved the person and had a successful flight. So, what we could do better, obviously, is to set size of the party and be very specific about that before we get to the airport. And that adjustment was changed. But again, that may not always be the case if someone doesn't think to check that when they're working with the parent and the student. So, again, something that seems simple to do, but can easily get missed if you're not disciplined enough following up. Some of the organizations that do these kind of discovery flights where there are groups of people, they use color-coded vests to say, okay, if you've got a yellow vest on, you're allowed on the ramp, but you've got to be accompanied by someone with a badge. And if it's a student, the student has to wear a blue vest. And if it's a parent, they have to wear a red vest. I mean, there's lots of ways to figure out how you're going to do ramp control. Any questions on this one?
Mark, just on the previous one, there was a question that popped up. And the comment was, I think that the FAA it says 60 to fly after Benadryl. But I think you read that right. It was 36, correct?
Yes. So I think the dose was every 6 hours. It's based on the dosage period.
Right.
So I was just trying to remember what the dosage period is for that Benadryl. So whatever the number of hours are for a dose to be effective, and then you multiply that times 5.
Gotcha. Thank you.
So, and those QR codes will take you to the bigger articles that will explain all the nuances of figuring out when it's good to fly with over-the-counter meds. So another example of a discovery flight student who initially we thought might be eligible for a STEM flight, but after initial assessment realized that was not appropriate for a STEM flight. And intake seemed to ask all the right questions. Mother was going to fly with the passenger. Um, we assessed the passenger was co-pilot seat eligible, meaning per the mother would follow directions, would not do things that were unexpected. Um, so pilot contacted the mother, asked similar intake questions again, but wanted to make sure that he was aware of any special interests or needs. And kind of surprisingly, the mother responds and said, was really mostly not, nonverbal and yells when excited. Doesn't like to wear headsets. Can get upset when you wear headsets, and when they have a problem with the young man getting upset, that they have to use an iPad and some different types of videos to calm him down. So that went from being, something that we would do to something that we would not recommend be done. Um, so it's important, again, to have redundancy in checking. And the VPO vetting process, we've now added more specific content around, can they wear a headset? Are there any trigger issues like loud noises, or, crowds? We know that some kids get nervous in crowds. Some kids don't like to talk, and if you ask them too many questions, that kind of thing. So we're improving the pre-flight experience, but it doesn't mean that when we're doing that over the phone for the first time that we're getting all the information. So we want to make sure that we cross-check that. So go ahead.
Yeah, just for those that might not understand what STEM stands for, could you clarify on that? The STEM?
Sure. No, I'm having a blank. So science, technology, engineering, and math.
There you
Yes.
go. Yep. Thanks. Thank you.
So good programs. And there's a bunch of different programs out there that are doing this, but STEM Flights is now doing a really good job at the national level of matching students with mentor pilots. And this particular organization is called Above the Clouds, and they do mostly flights of joy, inspiration for kids of age 8 and above, that need or would benefit from doing something different. And in some cases, it's aviation discovery. In other cases, it's just breaking up the routine of what is a challenging existence for them. So that's that.
Thank you.
So here's another youth discovery flight. And they had 14 flights scheduled with 15 to 20-minute increments. It's under a very busy Bravo. And all the flights are trying to do the same sightseeing circle and are flying very, very low. What's challenging about it is the planes have different performance levels. So some of them could be going 100, 110 knots. Some of them are going 170 plus knots. And they're trying to, give us good sightseeing trip around sites of interest or even flying over their house or school. So it's an interesting thing for a private pilot who may not be used to having to work in close proximity to all these other planes. So at the time, this particular organization did not have an air boss that was making sure that people were not trying to go to the same place at the same time. And there was no advanced training or discussion of, oh, how slow are you going to go? What is good practice? What are good routes to be following? Um, and there was a need to start adding that level of awareness into the pre-flight briefing that pilots were doing among themselves. Um, so I know that it's a common thing to do for fundraising or charities where you do sightseeing trips at the airport with, 3 or 4 planes that just keep going up over and over and over again. Um, it's very, very important to have, it seems obvious and now, but at the time when we were starting to do these, it wasn't obvious that we should be doing a much better job of coordinating who's where and when. So if you happen to be in one of these fundraising situations where you're just doing a quick sightseeing trip, maybe step back and say, whoa, maybe there's a helicopter. In this case, there were helicopter routes that we could be using to go over downtown Boston that were well defined. They were actually in our FMS, and we could, follow those in a schedule and stay away from each other in a very busy Bravo airspace. So, little things that we can do to make for a much safer experience. There's no questions there. We'll go into one of the dog ones of the day. So this is a pilots and pause scenario, and a good example of pilot and co-pilot on their very first trip. They had been told that all the animals would be in cages, and that they would have to be figuring out how to make the cages fit into their airplane. Um, there were 5 mature dogs, a puppy, um, but not all of them were in cages. And so cages were able to be positioned in the plane and secured by taking the rear seats out, which the pilot wasn't used to doing, so it took a while. Um, and then had one dog not in a cage with just a regular collar, and one puppy not in a cage. Um, so, and it's required now that each animal have paperwork especially when they're going across state lines. And that even applies to turtles. When I delivered turtles this year, it was the first year that we had each turtle having its own set of paperwork. Um, so it was compliant, but there was very little time going over how to set up the cages and to ensure good airflow and heat and cooling. Um, Luckily, there were pee pads, but not enough. And luckily, there weren't any accidents. Um, but there had been no training in that particular case for what to do with the puppy, and try to make sure that there was not accidents happening in the crew area of the plane. Um, there was no assessment to see if any of the dogs needed ear protection, and no discussion. Um, and generally learned, probably should have learned, but in this case didn't learn until afterwards, that there was really supposed to be no unsecured animals in the plane for fear to help avoid interfering with the controls at any given time. So, so here's the email again. If you're ever on a pilots and pause trip and you want to make sure that you have crates, you can email them, make sure you get crates, but it should be handled well in advance to make sure that all the dogs are delivered with crates. And one of the things that they're doing now a better job of is not leaving animals on the hot tarmac. Um, that would be something that you may not be, thinking strongly about because you've got shoes on, but when it's hot, the tarmac can obviously get into well above 120 degrees, which is not going to make a dog have a good experience, or any other kind of animal have a good experience. And then also trying to figure out how to best secure dogs that are not going to be in a cage. And there are a number of different methods to do that, and also Pilots and Paws as an organization can provide those type of collars. But definitely this picture of the puppy here in the center, this was actually from a flight where the pilot and co-pilot decided that it was going to be more fun to hand carry the puppy than to leave it in its cage. So that's a big no-no. We want safe flights for everyone, which means not letting puppies be in a place where they can interfere with controls if they get into a bump. I don't know if you have any questions there, but very good cause, fun to do. Service animals are another tricky thing, and they've I've only had one ever growl at me, which they're not supposed to do, but otherwise they've always been very rewarding to have on flights. And in this particular case, a young autistic girl with se pretty severe orthopedic issues and some other issues going on. Um, had a small service dog. But in this case, the purpose of the service dog and on my prior missions had not been described. Um, and it also wasn't clear who was managing pee breaks, because in this case, the dog didn't have a cage and didn't have a restraint to where we could secure it to the floor or a seat. Um, so, more context about the dog would have been helpful. All we had was the name of the dog, the breed, and the weight. So, since then, this particular organization's done a good job of making sure we get that information, but that can vary by organization and even by mission. So it's good for the pilot to make sure that they know more about the service animal as well as what the service animal's purpose is. In some cases, it's to detect a medical condition like a seizure. And in this case, it was just loud noises cause the child to get agitated. Uh, and uh, and agitation could be significant with minor physical agitation. And the dog role was to just be a calming influence, which worked. Um, but in the first flight with this particular animal, the commotion in the back because of the agitation that was occurring was quite distracting. But after that, once it was clear that it was a comforting role, it worked out really well, and it was fun to fly them. And so whenever their missions come up, and I, for example, go out of my way to try to take them. The other is, sometimes loading everybody on the airplane and getting going. Everyone's anxious to get going. Remembering to pee the dog, very, very important. And that applies to the prior slide as well, because dogs can get really whiny if they're getting uncomfortable. One of the other things I've noticed, and you can notice this in the bottom right, 2 pictures or 3 pictures. For some reason, if there's room, the dogs want to come up front. And really try to figure out how to get all the way into your feet, but definitely get your attention. So something to not be surprised by. And the black dog, the second from the left, is the one that growled at me. And apparently, because the plane was causing everyone to be in very tight quarters, it didn't like us, it was being protective. So it wasn't anything scary. It was just trying to understand what the dog's expected role is and how it's going to react. So I'm not sure if anybody has any
Yes.
questions here.
Yes, Mark. Kyla and McGinnis both asked a question to expand on ear protection for the animals.
Yeah, ear protection is recommended, and there's different kinds of ear protection, and some dogs are going to adapt other ways. There's some that look like headsets, like people headsets with a chin strap. There's other ones that look like a ski cap that pull over their head, so it's more snug and very hard to get off. And then there's others that think that it's reasonably short exposure, then it's not going to cause permanent harm. So in our case, when you're flying a turbine, in the jets, the passengers often don't have headsets anyway, so the dogs, we don't look at having to have headsets. But in a turboprop like a Meridian or a TBM, or in a regular piston like a Cirrus, it gets very noisy. So if you're going to be on a very long flight, you should at least mention it to whoever's responsible for the animal to see if ear protection is recommended. I do know that pilots and PAWS typically does not have ear protection for the animals that they're transporting. So one would hope, given the number of decades that they've been in the business of doing this, that it doesn't harm the animals to do, this type of trip without ear protection. So that was I don't know the real answer,
No,
just an observation. So
and Mark, another thing too that's been brought up a couple of times, it was there is a caveat for and sedating with antihistamine medications that have a long half-life. And it does say, so wait time is 60 hours for both Benadryl and Unison.
yeah, I think that's correct. I think
Yes.
that's correct.
So
It's a
it's
very, very, very long time.
right. So it's even though you may take it every 6 hours, the time frame is much
Well,
longer.
that's where the factor is. You multiply it times 5. So,
Right.
um, so the dosage may have been more over that. So that's
yeah,
just a general guidance, the 5 times. So if you look up the data that I highlighted in the QR codes, you'll find the tables with the exact recommendations by the type of medication.
right.
So
And I've got that up live right now.
yeah, so
And
very, very,
yeah,
very important that if you are taking over-the-counter medication to go into the FAA content here and be at least sensitive to their recommendations for when to not fly if you're taking something, and if you do take something, how much you should wait before flying.
and it's very comprehensive. It discusses a lot or indicates a lot of medications,
Yeah,
over-the-counter meds. Yeah, it covers them.
there's a lot of data there. That's why I thought it was
Yes.
important to highlight those.
Yes.
Um,
Thank you.
oh, so this will be we're getting into more normal scenarios now, and this is a co-owner in my plane who was doing his first flight ever as a volunteer medical mission, um, and it relates to some of the things that we reviewed in the first 2 sessions of doing this webinar. So, uh, flight home for severely ill and thankfully treated infant, but had a heart monitor, an IV tube, and the young parents were very, very nervous. And the pilot had gone over needing to get up over the wing, um, and they did discuss how to do this in a way that they would feel secure doing it. They didn't have a step stool, but they got into plane first, and handed. They agreed the pilot would hand the baby to the parent. Um, One of the parents had to be a co-pilot, and the other parent was in the back with the infant and the heart monitor and other required medication. And it was a little bumpy. It was a little bumpy. Um, so whenever they hit a bump, the heart monitor would make a loud change, um, and enough so that it was worrying to the parents and distracting to the pilot. So what went well is, the pilot didn't get distracted. And this gets back to some of the things we've discussed in prior scenarios is understanding what you can handle and what you can't handle. Um, but knew that, the heart monitor kept going back to normal after a bump. So he didn't think that it was anything significant and that the bumps weren't any worse than hitting severe New England potholes. So again, didn't think that it was going to be anything life-threatening, but it had not been discussed prior and prior to the flight is what's the heart monitor for, and when it makes a certain indication, is that a serious indication that means you need to get on the ground, or is it not? And that wasn't reviewed with the pilot. So the pilot was in the position of having to make an assessment of is this significant or not. So he had already done a good job getting him into the plane, but then figuring out, what was going to be an en route set of scenarios that he had to react to had not really been, thought through. So it resulted in the intake process asking a few more questions, but it's still really incumbent, as we saw in some of the other cases, for the pilot to sort of re-ask those questions to make sure that he or she's aware of the nuances of any equipment that's being transported and the dependency of the patient on those connected devices. In this particular case, at the fuel stop, the parents got out and decided to rent a car and go the rest of the way in the car, which was probably a good decision for them because they were, just too nervous. Um, and it probably would have been more than safe enough to continue. Um, but and again, in all the times I've been flying, that's only happened this time that we're seeing here. Um, but we need to, as pilots, understand anything that's going into the airplane that can be a distraction, especially if it's equipment that can make noises that we can hear. Any questions on this one?
Yes, Mark, just to clarify, VPO stands for
Volunteer pilot organization. So Angel Flight,
organizations.
PALS, Skyhope, Lifeline, and Mercy Medical. Those are all individual volunteer pilot organizations. So at the beginning of the slide deck, where I listed, where you saw a bunch of different names, those are all different volunteer pilot organizations. And then STEM Flights, that's a volunteer pilot organization. So many of those around the country. None of them are national. So
Thanks.
how are we doing time-wise? Pretty good. Here's another animal one. Interesting situation of, do I go or do I not go? And assessing whether it's important to choose a family priority over doing a compelling animal priority. In this case, puppy going a single puppy going to forever home versus and having weather not help out with the weather making the flight take much longer than was anticipating, and checking in with the volunteer pilot organization to learn that there were no other available pilots that day to substitute for the pilot who had signed up for the mission. So what to do? So what we always want to do is, if we're asking ourselves if we're, should do make the, do the mission or not, we should just say, if we're asking that question, usually it means we shouldn't do the mission. And at least that's my personal experience. As soon as I asked the question, I said, yeah, no, I probably should not be asking the question and just not do the flight. Because of, tight schedule, get back in time, disappointed daughter, disappointed wife, not worth it to me over flying a dog. And there's always got to be a plan B for flying dogs, people, animals, of any type. And that plan B has to, we're flying small planes, so we can't go in all weather. So we just always need to not get caught and get theiritis. And in this case, it worked out to overnight the dog and fly the next day. So another example of just making sure that we're thinking through these missions, and the use of the word mission again is just such an incorrect term because nothing is mission critical. We should always know that whoever we're flying has a way to get to where they're going, either through another mode of transportation or just by delaying the flight. If there's no questions on that one, that's
Just one question, not directly related to that, but comment was, I have flown many missions after the hurricane in North Carolina. Are these flights tax deductible?
They should be, yes.
Okay.
And the organization that you flew them for, it may have been Aerobridge if you were flying them, or Pies and Paws, or there's a bunch of different organizations that were arranging these. They should be 501c3 registered nonprofits. They should be able to issue you a letter that confirms that you did these flights. And then you should be all set for a tax deduction. If not, you can also just list it and give it to your accountant, and they should be able to tell you what else you might need to be able to get the deduction. You've got to also, and you should talk to your tax advisor about this, but you can only deduct the variable cost of the flight. Um,
And that being describe the variable cost.
fuel, fuel,
Fuel. Okay,
fuel, and any variable fees like FBO fees or things like that.
gotcha. One more thing, just a comment that I know you addressed earlier, but Richard said that Pilot's Pause provides free crates.
Right.
Yeah.
They do, and that's the email I gave, crates at
Right.
pilotsandpause.org.
Yes.
So if you don't think you're going to have crates, you can just email them and they'll get you free crates.
Now, are those on loan to you that you have to return, or is it something that,
They like them to be returned, but it's
sure.
not the end of the world. It's not the end of the world. So you would
Okay.
typically you would leave them with wherever you're dropping them off,
Yes.
um, and they would take care of it.
Great. Thanks.
And yeah, and sometimes one of the turtle flights, I went down with turtles and came back with 5 times the number of crates that I brought down. They just broke down the crates and stacked them in the plane.
Gotcha.
So yeah, there's all kinds of ways to get crates back to where they need to go.
Thanks, Mark.
Good questions. So another fun one. I'm not sure how many people fly long distance flights. This is a 700-mile one. And the routing and certain routes in certain parts of the country, there's just standard routes that you're going to be given. And if you're coming from the west into the Boston area, for example, they want to keep you north towards Gardner, and they make you fly around the city to get to your airport, which happens to be south of the airport. And how do you deal with that? So the clearance in this particular case was right through where the thunderstorms were going, and you didn't want to go there. So one way to help clearance is to not keep debating with them, especially in a busy airspace, that you can't do that and you want them to give you something else, is to pick a route that they can do without a lot of drama. So you're trying to, not reinvent the wheel in terms of routing. And then once you're en route, come up with reasonable ways to modify the route, again, within what you think they should be able to do to get you where you want to go. So this is an example of, no, if I picked my normal airport or any airport north of the city, they were going to make me fly through the thunderstorm line and have to pick my way through it, which I didn't want to do, and it was building. So in this case, I said, hey, I want to go to Martha's Vineyard, which is a place on the bottom right. And then, so it kept me, which using a standard route, kept me away from all the storms. And then as I got closer, I said, hey, I'd really want to go to my airport north here. And can I do that? And they were accommodating, and it was clear of the weather, so there was really no extra effort on their part. And I didn't ask for that diversion until I was out of what I knew was the normal arrival route on commercial traffic into Boston. So again, if you can do something to sort of help ATC help you, uh, it's a good thing to think about, especially far in advance. So if you know the weather's going to be bad, start to think about ways that you're going to, work to get around these things and not be thinking about that in the air. So my typical thing is I'll look at routing the day before. I'll look at 2 or 3 alternatives. I'll think about what my strategy has to be and when I'm going to have to make a decision, and try to again make it easy on air traffic control. So it's a lot of fun. So in this case, trying to stay. Oops, wrong direction here. So everyone wants to, again, we want to avoid, get-there-itis. So you recognize the mission bias, have a plan B before you even get to the airport. And make sure you're proactively thinking about what the alternatives might be, and to make it easy on ATC, especially in very, very busy airspace. And in this case, evaluating the weather worked out really well. In some cases, it's not as clear. But if you're giving air traffic control, a couple of choices, and then you're also explaining to them, why you're doing it. Hey, I'm a compassion flight, or I'm angel flight, or hero flight. I'm trying to give the passengers a smooth ride, and blah blah blah. 90% of the time they go out of their way to be supportive. Even the turtles, I'll say, hey, if I can get a shortcut at a particular, juncture, I've got turtles on board, you'll be surprised how fast they try to accommodate you. So, any questions here?
Nope, all set.
Cool. So I don't know if I want to go over this one or not. Let's see here. So I'm going to do this one, and we will try to rush it in before we get too far here. Um, so Three Sisters going to camp, very low IMC day up and down the East Coast of the US. And I'd already done a landing to minimums and to pick them up. And this is a situation where uh, one girl is got cancer, and two sisters are going to a cancer camp without their parents. So I show up and I pick up three kids, and parents trust me to take off with their three kids into the clouds. So and there's a lot of flights going into the same airport. And air traffic control says, "Oh, you're moving faster than everybody else. I'm going to let you skip to the, head of the line." And they vector me very close to the final approach fix. Um, and it looks like the autopilot looks like it couples, glide slope doesn't couple, and the flight director starts oscillating up and down uh, a good 5 degrees. It makes no sense. I've never seen this, never trained for it. Just doesn't make any sense. Hit the toga button, nothing happens. Try to put in a heading and hit heading mode and set up to fly the mist. The autopilot panel has frozen. The buttons are not working at all. And air traffic control is yelling at me, giving me altitude stops, and so it's one of those things that there's a lot of things going wrong at the same time. Never have trained for the sequence of things that are going wrong at the same time, and you're in IMC. So,
Mark, was the autopilot still engaged at that point,
no,
or did it
no,
disengage? So you're hand flying.
no,
Okay,
I'm hand
gotcha.
flying on top of
Yep.
that as well.
I-
I'm trying to re-engage it. So,
yes.
Because what had happened is the autopilot had tried to chase the oscillating flight director,
Yes.
which obviously I didn't want to have happen.
Yep.
And the oscillations were getting bigger, so it was very distracting. Um, so again, and I already had maybe 800 hours in this airplane, so I thought I knew the avionics really well. Very interesting situation. So what had happened is there had been a recent avionics upgrade, um, and it turns out I was the lucky test pilot to identify a bug in the upgrade.
Oh,
So,
lovely.
and
Mm,
and in this particular case, I was forcing myself to take a breath, scan, and fly the bloody airplane because the airplane wasn't falling out of the sky. But I was getting yelled at by air traffic control because there was a lot of planes trying to come into the same airport at the same time. And this was right above Long Island, so you had arrivals into Kennedy and LaGuardia coming over you, and it was not a fun airspace. So I finally had to answer them because they were a distraction in my ear because they were yelling at me a lot. And I finally just said, "I'm busy, leave me alone." So, I was able to stabilize the airplane and, got vectors, and luckily there was a VFR airport nearby. And, landed, they gave me a phone number. New York Approach was very accommodating. There was no incident. I laid over, got myself to chair fly, tried to figure out what was going on, document what was going, and
mm.
flew it right off to the service center, with no incident. But I did make sure to document what, was going on. Um, and I had not really had, you don't really train for emergencies where you're saying emergency, out loud and going through the drill, when other things that are distracting are going on, all at the same time. And you're seeing things that you've just never seen before. They're not documented. So, in this case, it all worked out, and it turned out there was a bug in the software that if they vectored you too close to the final approach fix, it wouldn't couple. The whole freezing thing they said they had seen once before ever, and they couldn't get it back to repeat. Um, but it was just, one of those things where you realize that you're flying avionics, that's software, and that means that people can make mistakes, and
Yes.
you might be the lucky one to discover it. And it really stresses the importance of having partial panel training, some of which you can only do in a simulator. So if you do have access to a simulator, you shouldn't be avoiding that. You should be using that to do scenarios that you can never ever do in the airplane. So good lesson for me. I probably lost 2 or 3 pounds of sweat in 5 minutes.
Mm.
And little girls only had about an hour and a half, 2 hour delay. We were lucky. There was a donated helicopter service nearby that took them back to the camp, and everything worked out. But it's a lot of lessons. You can get distracted with get there itis. I probably had 2 seconds of a thought saying, "Oh, I can hand fly my way out of this onto the ground," and it's saying, no, no,
Right.
there's too many things broken right now.
Yes.
Trying to make believe I don't need all these other things working is not a good idea. So,
No, not an
um,
IMC. Now, how many flights had you had after that software was upgraded before you, took off an IMC?
um, the next day was VMC, so I didn't have to. The
Yes.
the
Yeah.
return flight from the service center was in IMC.
Yeah. I guess what
Um,
I'm, I guess what I'm getting at is, should you go off an IMC right after a software upgrade or avionics work that's been performed on your airplane? I know it ground checks good, but really until you get it up in the air and get it tested, it's
yeah, this
pretty
would not have been caught on the ground with any test that you could have
right,
done.
right, right.
Um, and that's the reality of a lot of the software issues. You may not ever find them until you're in the air. And that's why it's also important to read your forums and look at other forums to see what other
Mhm.
people are, have happening with your particular platform. Um, so this is one of my favorite ones to share because there's a lot of things that can go wrong that you can just, even if you thought you've trained for everything. And, good news is, if you've had aviate, navigate, communicate beaten into your
Yes.
training,
Yeah.
that little series of steps can really make a big difference on an
Sure.
outcome. And that's more or less what helped me perform well in this particular situation is, fly the bloody airplane, ignore everything else, and
Yes.
not keep narrowing it down to simple things. I care about an altitude and a heading. I don't care about anything else.
Yeah.
So, and then so once I got everything hand flying into that mode, ignoring all the other things that were going on, then it was easy to start adding things back in and making requests. So,
Right. You didn't get
uh,
fixated on that operation at autopilot. I mean, you made a quick decision, and a right decision to stop messing with it, and
yeah.
disconnect it and get out of it. Yeah.
Yeah, and that again, partial panel training that will
Yes.
help you. And
Yes.
I don't think we did, prior to that, I know I didn't do enough. And after that, I've probably done more than enough. So we're at the hour.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if we have any wrap-up questions, but I know we appreciate you guys doing this. It's really good if you can share the scenarios with us. That'd be great. Oh, Robert, I didn't change your email address down here. So if you have scenarios you'd like us to consider for future episodes, we'd really, really like to see them. So just email me, please. And again, we're fine tuning the content in these. So if you have any suggestions or recommendations for changes, or just might like to see something specific that we haven't touched on, let me know. And again, we'll work it in. But we do appreciate you doing these, and we know it's making you. We're hoping that it makes you a safer pilot.
Yes. And as far as the official ending of the webinar tonight, it's over. Wings credit, Jim Logie is going to be getting uh, the attendance roster uploaded, and we're going to get that credit to you here probably within a couple of days. And also, this session tonight is recorded, and it's going to be available on Social Flight. I did post in the chat the link to Social Flight, but if you just Google Social Flight, one word, you'll be able to find their site, and it will be there, I would say, within a week.
And we have a non-wings credit version of it on the Air Carolines website under the pilot's safety section as well.
Mhm.
And that will be posted next week as well.
Yeah.
So cool. Thanks, everyone.
Yes. And Mark, you want to just stay on for a couple questions?
Oh yeah, sure. Let's keep
Um,
on going.
Yeah, VJ asks, is the previous case working with ATC? Do you identify with ATC as VPO for special requests?
So certain organizations, or most of the organizations have that carry people, have call signs that you can sign up for. And that way you have to be able to program it in your transponder. And then when you file a flight plan, use that code. So for example, Compassion Flight, with Lifeline